In a tense courtroom, Judge Madeline Carter is stunned to recognize the defendant, Marcus Bennett, as her childhood best friend. As the trial unfolds, hidden truths emerge, forcing them into a battle between justice and the past. Will the truth be buried forever? A gloomy morning cast heavy rain over the Charleston Federal Courthouse in South Carolina. Inside the packed courtroom, tension filled the air. The gallery overflowed with reporters, and the jury sat in silence, all eyes locked on the most shocking trial of the year. Judge Madeline Carter, known for her unwavering fairness, took her seat, expecting another routine case, but the moment Marcus Bennett, the defendant, was escorted in, the sharp clank of metal chains dragging across the floor shattered the silence. Madeline froze. Standing before her wasn't just a man accused of armed assault and robbery. It was her childhood best friend, someone she hadn't seen in over 2 decades. Marcus lifted his head, their eyes met. He stiffened. She held her breath. Both knew this was no ordinary trial. This was a reckoning with the past. Madeline Carter closed her eyes for a brief moment, but the memories rushed in like a flood. Before she became a respected judge, before Marcus stood in chains before her as a defendant, they had once been just 2 kids growing up in the sweltering heat of Charleston in the 1980s. They came from 2 completely different worlds. Madeline lived in a quaint white wooden house on a quiet street. Her mother was a dedicated school teacher, and her father was a successful businessman who believed her future should be carefully planned. She never knew struggle. Marcus Bennett, on the other hand, grew up in a place where danger lurked around every corner, a cramped, run-down neighborhood where gunshots in the night were nothing unusual. His mother worked 2 jobs just to keep food on the table, and his father had been gone for as long as Marcus could remember. Their paths crossed in an unexpected way. One scorching summer afternoon, Madeline found herself cornered by a group of rich kids from a nearby private school. They shoved her, mocked her, and pushed her to the ground. She fought back, but she knew she didn't stand a chance until Marcus showed up. "Leave her alone." His voice wasn't loud, but it carried enough weight to make them freeze. With a single, well-aimed punch, Marcus sent the biggest bully stumbling backward. No one wanted to mess with Marcus Bennett from the wrong side of town. From that day forward, they became friends, even though no one understood why a rich girl would spend time with a boy from the streets. They would meet in secret by the Ashley River, where the breeze was cool and the world felt far away. They shared their dreams. Madeline wanted to become a lawyer, someone who fought for justice. Marcus just wanted to escape this life, to break free from the cycle that trapped him. "Do you ever think about leaving this place?" Marcus once asked, staring at the moon's reflection on the water. Madeline had laughed, thinking the future was too far away to worry about. But Marcus didn't laugh. He always knew the world wasn't fair to him. But childhood dreams don't last forever. One sweltering summer night, Madeline and Marcus sat on her front steps, whispering about things only they understood. She didn't know her father had been standing there the whole time, watching from the shadows, his expression dark with fury. The screen door slammed open. "What the hell are you doing here?" His voice was low and sharp. Marcus jumped to his feet, tense like a cornered animal. But before he could say anything, Madeline's father grabbed her arm and yanked her inside. "If I ever see you near my daughter again, I'll make sure you disappear. Do you understand me?" Madeline struggled, but Marcus stood frozen, his dark eyes filled with something unreadable. He knew he had no choice. The door slammed shut. The next day, Marcus was gone. No goodbye, no explanation. Madeline waited. She searched, but the boy from the wrong side of town had vanished from her life. At least, that's what she had thought. Until now. In this courtroom. Madeline Carter tightened her grip on the gavel, forcing herself to maintain steady breaths as the trial began. The air inside the courtroom was heavy, thick with tension. Even the sound of paper rustling felt as sharp as a blade. The prosecutor, Richard Lowell, a veteran in Charleston's legal system, stepped forward with confidence. Known for his relentless pursuit of convictions, he cast a piercing glance at the jury before speaking. The witness testimony. The store clerk, a middle-aged man with a nervous expression, took the stand. He recounted that on the night of the robbery, a man wearing a red hoodie stormed into the store, demanded money, smashed the cash register, and assaulted him before fleeing with $5,000 in cash. When asked if he could positively identify the attacker, the witness hesitated, glanced at the prosecutor, and then said, "I didn't see his face clearly, but I think it was him," pointing straight at Marcus. Madeline narrowed her eyes slightly. The witness couldn't even confirm the face, yet he was still identifying Marcus. The surveillance footage. The prosecutor played the security footage from the convenience store. The screen displayed a tall figure in a red hoodie, moving quickly across the store. The footage was grainy, the lighting poor, making it impossible to see the suspect's face. The prosecutor turned to the jury, his voice firm. Ladies and gentlemen, as you can see, the suspect matches the witness's description. While the face is unclear, the height, build, and movements, everything aligns with Marcus Bennett. Madeline tightened her grip on the bench. The figure in the footage did resemble Marcus, but was it enough to convict him? The officer's testimony. Officer Derek Moore, the arresting officer, took the stand. He stated that Marcus was found just 3 blocks from the crime scene, walking alone. Upon searching him, police found $5,000 in his pocket, the exact amount stolen. The moment I saw him, I knew he was our guy. Some things don't need much explanation. When you've been in this job long enough, you just know when someone's guilty. A chill ran down Madeline's spine, a statement filled with bias. Marcus wasn't arrested because of strong evidence. He was arrested because he fit the description. Madeline forced herself to stay composed, but inside her mind raced. Something felt off. The witness couldn't clearly identify the suspect. The surveillance footage was too blurry to confirm Marcus's face. Marcus was found near the crime scene, but no one actually saw him fleeing the store. Everything was circumstantial. But the part that troubled her most was the $5,000. That couldn't just be a coincidence. If Marcus was truly innocent, why was the stolen money in his pocket? She glanced at him. Marcus sat motionless, his eyes fixed on the wooden table in front of him. He wasn't angry. He wasn't protesting. He looked resigned. Madeline felt her chest tighten. She had seen that look before. The look of a boy backed into a corner with nowhere left to run. If Marcus really committed this crime, she couldn't let her personal feelings cloud her judgment. But if the system was railroading him because he was Marcus Bennett, a black man with a minor record from a poor neighborhood, then what? She couldn't afford to get this wrong. All eyes in the courtroom were on her. This was no longer just another trial. This was a battle for justice. Madeline Carter maintained her composed expression, but inside she could feel her heartbeat quickening, not from nerves, but from the sheer absurdity of how this case was unfolding. Across the room, Richard Lowell, the prosecutor, still wore his usual smug smile, as if the case had already been decided the moment Marcus walked into the courtroom. But on the other side, Olivia Brooks, Marcus's defense attorney, slowly rose to her feet. She was young, but her eyes were sharp, filled with confidence. She stepped into the center of the courtroom, facing the jury, and began her counterattack. "Mr. Collins," Olivia turned to the store clerk, her voice steady yet firm. "You testified that the suspect wore a red hoodie, smashed the cash register, and assaulted you." The man nodded. "Yes. But at the time, the store was fairly dim, and the suspect had the hood pulled up, covering most of his face." The witness hesitated, glancing at the prosecutor before nodding again. "That's right." Olivia stepped closer, her voice sharpening. "Did you clearly see the attacker's face?" The man blinked rapidly, looking visibly unsure. Not completely, but I think it was him." A ripple of murmurs spread through the courtroom. Olivia seized the moment. "You think? Or you know?" I'm not sure." The witness looked down, realizing he had just walked into a trap. Madeline watched the scene unfold. The witness's testimony was now crumbling. Next, Olivia turned her attention to the surveillance footage. The prosecution presented this footage as undeniable evidence, but I want the jury to pay attention to a key detail. She paused, letting the video play once more. The suspect in the video is clearly at least 4 to 5 inches taller than the store clerk. She pointed to a height marker on the store's back wall. "But according to official records, my client is 5 feet 10 inches tall, meaning the person in the video is at least 2 inches taller than Marcus." The jury members exchanged glances, doubt creeping into their faces. Olivia turned back to them, her voice unwavering. "So, does the person in this footage truly match Marcus Bennett?" "Officer Moore?" Olivia now faced the arresting officer. "You testified that you arrested my client just 3 blocks away from the scene, correct?" The officer nodded. "Yes." "And you stated that the suspect was wearing a red hoodie, correct?" "Correct." Olivia took a measured step toward Marcus's table, lowering her voice slightly for emphasis. "Then tell me, when you arrested Marcus, why wasn't he wearing a red hoodie?" The room went completely silent. The officer tensed slightly, but kept his voice steady. "He must have ditched it before we got to him." Olivia stepped closer. "So, did you search the surrounding area to find the hoodie?" The officer froze for a second, then replied, "We didn't have time." A low murmur rippled through the courtroom. "No time?" Olivia raised an eyebrow. "You had time to arrest a man based on suspicion, but not enough time to find the one piece of clothing that could have actually connected him to the crime?" The officer pressed his lips together, sweat forming on his forehead. Madeline remained still, but a deep unease settled in her chest. The witness couldn't confirm the suspect's face. The height in the footage didn't match. The crucial red hoodie was never found. She glanced at the officer, then at Prosecutor Lowell. For the first time, he no longer looked so confident. Something wasn't right. She had presided over hundreds of cases. She had seen cases where the evidence was so clear that there was no room for doubt. But this time, something was being hidden. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay composed. If Marcus was innocent, then someone was trying to frame him. And if the justice system could so easily twist the facts, did she still believe in the justice she had spent her entire career upholding? The air inside the courtroom was thick with tension, as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting for what would happen next. Officer Derek Moore, the officer who arrested Marcus, was starting to look uneasy. The case had seemed so straightforward at first, but Olivia Brooks's relentless questioning had begun to crack the prosecution's argument wide open. Officer Moore, Olivia continued, her voice calm but unyielding. Earlier, you testified that when you arrested Marcus, you did not find the red hoodie that the witness described, correct? The officer cleared his throat and nodded. That's correct. Olivia raised an eyebrow. Did you search the surrounding area for that hoodie? Derek tightened his jaw, his gaze shifting slightly. As I said, he tried to keep his voice steady, I didn't have time to. So you admit that you never searched for the red hoodie? Olivia cut him off, her voice ringing through the courtroom. Silence. The officer froze, realizing he had just made a critical mistake. The room erupted in whispers and murmurs. The jury exchanged uncertain glances, and Prosecutor Lowell stiffened, realizing the case was slipping through his fingers. Madeline gripped the gavel tighter, her breathing growing heavier. This was no longer just a case. No clear witness identification, height discrepancies in the footage, the missing red hoodie, never even searched for. She stared at the officer, then at Prosecutor Lowell. For the first time, he no longer looked so confident. They hadn't arrested Marcus based on evidence. They arrested him because he fit the part. Her fingers turned white from gripping the gavel. If the system could frame an innocent man this easily, did she still believe in the justice she had spent her entire career upholding? But before Madeline could process it further, Olivia revealed her trump card. Olivia walked to the defense table and picked up a USB drive, holding it up for the court to see. Your Honor, she declared, her voice booming with authority. We have just received security footage from a different camera angle inside the store. This will change everything. Prosecutor Lowell shot to his feet, his face turning pale. What is this? Why was this never provided before? Olivia smirked. Because it was just recovered this morning, and I suspect the prosecution never wanted it to come to light. All eyes were locked on the screen as Olivia pressed play. The footage was clearer than the previous one. A man in a red hoodie stormed into the store, moving quickly. Then, the entire courtroom froze. The suspect turned his head toward the camera, and this time, a critical detail became visible. A long scar ran down the side of his neck. Madeline sat up straight, her eyes widening. Marcus did not have a scar. The courtroom exploded. Jury members exchanged shocked looks. Reporters typed frantically, and the gallery erupted in whispers. Marcus turned to Olivia, his eyes filled with emotion. For the first time in years, it felt like someone was finally listening. Madeline brought down the gavel hard, order in the court. But the truth was out. Marcus Bennett had been wrongfully accused, and someone was trying to cover it up. The air in the courtroom was so thick with tension it felt suffocating. No one spoke. No one moved. Everyone was waiting. The jury had been deliberating for nearly 4 hours. People knew that a long deliberation meant fierce debate. Some jurors were likely convinced by the prosecution, those who believed that the system didn't make mistakes, but others had to be questioning everything after the new video shattered the case. Madeline Carter stared at the bench, steadying her breath. She had presided over countless trials. She had seen hardened criminals, desperate innocents, and trials full of deception. But never before had she felt pressure like this. The jury room door opened. A female juror stepped inside, holding a folded slip of paper. She cast a quick glance at Marcus Bennett before handing it to the court clerk. The room fell silent. Madeline took the note, her fingers trembling ever so slightly, despite her attempt to stay composed. This was it. She unfolded the paper, scanning the brief words. A shiver ran down her spine. Madeline took a deep breath, lifting her gaze to the courtroom. She tapped the gavel lightly. In the case of the state of South Carolina versus Marcus Bennett, the jury has reached a verdict. She paused for a fraction of a second. The entire room held its breath. Not guilty. For a moment, it was as if no one fully processed what they had just heard. Then suddenly, the room erupted. Some people burst into tears. Others let out deep sighs of relief. A few even hugged one another in shock. Marcus Bennett didn't move right away. He sat frozen, his eyes wide, as if his brain couldn't comprehend what had just happened. Madeline never looked away from Marcus. Then, little by little, the tension on his face broke and tears slid down his cheeks. Not loud sobs, just silent, exhausted tears rolling down the face of a man who had endured too much for too long. His hands shook slightly, then clenched into fists, as if he was grasping onto reality itself after everything, after all the battles today. He was free. Madeline set the verdict slip down, releasing the tension in her shoulders she hadn't even realized she was holding. She thought she would feel relieved, but instead, there was an unsettling emptiness, not because of the verdict, but because of the brutal truth of the system. Marcus Bennett had almost been crushed. If that second surveillance video had never surfaced, if Olivia Brooks hadn't fought to the end, he could have spent decades in prison or worse. She tightened her grip on the gavel. She had spent her life believing in justice, but now she realized that justice didn't come from legal procedures written on paper. It only existed when someone was willing to fight for it. She looked at Marcus again. For the first time in the entire trial, he met her gaze directly. No anger, no fear, just one unspoken question in his eyes. "Do you still believe in justice, Madeline?" She didn't answer, because maybe she wasn't sure anymore. The courtroom was nearly empty. The murmurs, the whispers, the chaos had faded as the last spectators drifted out. A few clerks remained, packing up documents, but Madeline Carter hadn't moved from her seat. She stared down at the gavel in her hand, feeling its weight in a way she never had before. Throughout the trial, she had done everything by the book. She had remained impartial, refused to let her personal feelings interfere. So why did she still feel so hollow inside? Footsteps echoed in the silence. Madeline looked up. Marcus Bennett stood before her, no longer in shackles, no longer with fear in his eyes like when he first walked into the courtroom. But there was no relief either, only exhaustion, only silence. He looked at her, a look that held decades of unspoken words, of pain neither of them had ever addressed. "Why didn't you say anything from the start?" His voice wasn't angry, but it cut deep in a way that words never should. "We were friends once, Madeline." Madeline took a deep breath, meeting his gaze. How could she explain? That she couldn't let personal history interfere with the case? That she had to prove his innocence not because of their past, but because he deserved it? That, even now, after everything, she wasn't sure if the system had ever truly been fair to him? She couldn't say all of that, but she knew what she could say. "I needed to be sure you were exonerated, not because of our past, but because you deserved real justice." She spoke slowly, carefully, as if she was etching those words into her own mind. Marcus held her gaze, then suddenly he let out a short, quiet laugh, not bitter, not amused, just tired. "Real justice," he repeated, his voice no longer angry, just filled with a quiet resignation. "Do you think you found it?" Madeline couldn't answer. She wanted to say she still believed in justice, that she still believed in the system she had spent her life upholding, but was she just lying to herself? Marcus didn't wait for an answer. He simply gave a small nod, then turned and walked away, his tall frame disappearing through the courthouse doors. Madeline sat still, her fingers tightening around the gavel. For the first time in her career, she realized that justice wasn't just about verdicts. It wasn't just about evidence or legal codes or the words written in law books. It was a battle against the unseen forces that manipulated the system. She stood up, adjusting the robes that had once felt like a symbol of power, but now felt more like a responsibility. Then she walked out of the courthouse. The afternoon sun cast long shadows on the steps, but she knew this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. She wouldn't let another Marcus Bennett be swallowed by the system, no matter what it took. Justice has never been as simple as black or white. It is the struggle to find truth in the gray areas, where prejudice and mistakes thrive. A person can be convicted not for what they did, but for how they looked, for fitting a description rather than being guilty. But the truth, no matter how deeply buried, always finds a way to surface. It can be distorted, hidden behind powerful hands, but it can never be silenced forever. Power can crush an innocent man, but it can also be defeated when someone dares to stand up, to question, to fight back. Justice does not exist on its own. It only exists when someone is willing to fight for it.